It is so lovely to have these questions for our very first Wyldewood Circle Q&A for the month of June 2025. So I am Joanna.
And I'm Denise.
All right, beautiful. So shall we get started? We had some excellent submissions, and even though people couldn't be here live, I'm excited to answer these. We were looking over them right before we started. So let's see, shall we go in order? Just take them as they come?
Yeah.
Okay. How does one go about learning and integrating all of the traditions and information that you are exposed to? It is very overwhelming. That's a big question, and it can be overwhelming, that is for sure. My first stab at this would be that it's really important to have a good foundation. So you have a framework of something to fit it all into. And the frame can be something very simple. You can say, well, I know that I've been drawn to, and I really like doing meditation and journey work. It's one of my favorite things. It seems to really help me. Okay. So then when there's a new piece of information or something new that you are passionate about and that you're called to, you can find a way to sort of play to your strengths and think about how you can integrate that new thing that you're excited about or idea into the thing you already do. If you already meditate every day and you're curious about a specific god, they seem to be really interesting, you could add, saying a prayer to that deity into the daily practice of dropping down and doing a few minutes of meditation that you already have. So you want to start with where you already have a strength and then see how you can integrate something new into it and know that you start small. You don't have to try to digest, 10 books all at once and suddenly do like 100 magical practices a day. You won't be able to anyway. So choose what calls to you and integrate it already into your habits and your life somehow.
I would say that in addition, any particular pantheon that you like, stick with one at a time, and work with that pantheon. So each pantheon comes with its own set of gods. It sounds like a kit. Oh, look,
Uh, oh
I
dear.
got the Norse kit. It comes with all these gods. It does. You don't have to go and look for, oh, I have a deity of, I'm working on prosperity. So now I'm looking for all the prosperity gods. I'm going to call on all of them. Well, that's a lot. And also each one pantheon has all the things that you need in that particular pantheon kit. So you can call on a deity of prosperity for each pantheon. Like Joanna suggested, you can do, a meditation, something that you're strong at, and then just, put a little dollop of whatever it is that you're focusing on. That's great. Small steps as you go, as you're learning. Don't overwhelm yourself.
So that ties beautifully into the next question, which is with so many pantheons, how will I know which one I should adhere to? Another giant question that we could talk for an hour on any one of these, quite honestly. So yeah, I'll take a stab first. It is, in my opinion, unless you are super extremely set on, well, the only thing I have ever been interested in since I was a little kid is everything about Vikings and the Norse. And I just knew that that was where I feel like I lived there in another life. And I, started learning Old Icelandic. It's like, okay, well, maybe the Norse pantheon is really where you want to put your focus. But outside of feeling something like that, it's really good to be diverse. We are both, Denise and I are polytheists in the sense that we believe that it is really nice to have relationships, just like it's nice to have friendships with lots of different types of people and from different backgrounds. And it's nice to have lots of good relations in your life. You don't need to choose one. This is not a monotheist thing. Being spiritual in the sense of the type of witchcraft that we practice means that you do have many relationships. So you don't need to adhere to only one, in our opinion. Now, there are lots of other pagans and witches who would disagree and say, no, it is really important to only have one, and those are the relations that you stick with. That's a fine, belief system to keep to, and it works for a lot of people. However, especially if you're new to all of this, it would be sort of like introducing yourself, getting to know some people. These are all relationships. So you want to, as Denise said, stick to one to begin with, learn about one set of friends first. And then you can see like which friend group do you really seemed to have the best relationship, which works best for you and for everything in your life. But it's you don't have to adhere to anything right away, certainly.
No, and you could decide, hey, for the next month, I'm going to focus on the Norse. And then the next month, I'm going to focus on the Celts. And then the month after that, I'm going to focus on the Egyptians. And the month after that, I'm going to focus on the Greeks. And that's fine. And you don't have to, make a marriage with any one of them. You can honor all of them because, as Joanna mentioned, this is not monotheism. You are allowed to have a lot of friends. It's like, I guess, polyamory. You are, you have many friends, many loves. You do not need to just stick with one or just one deity. Like, oh, only Freya, that's it, nobody else. Yeah, because that's not what Freya does. Again, it's a whole kit, and the kit has many gods in it. Learn about those gods, and then you can move on and learn about some others. Follow your interests and your passions. You don't need to make a commitment to anyone right now.
In what I was saying about the pantheon interest, something about ancient history already came up, which our next question is, why is it important to know so much history? Now, this question is interesting because in the Wyldewood Circle, we don't really include a ton of history in our stuff. Although in our discussions, I'm sure we are going to get into history because that's us. And of course, we're going to talk about it. And it's really fun. I am, known as Hermione in the Coven and amongst all of my friends in all aspects of my life. That has been my nickname since, since the
It's Harry Potter.
Yeah. It suits me well, I will say. I think that it is important to know our history because, well, for a lot of reasons. I have to choose one.
You don't have to choose one.
No, but just for the purposes of this video. Otherwise, I'll just overwhelm with so many reasons. First and foremost, it is really important to understand how other people have lived, right? We come, as we've already mentioned a couple of times in this, we live in what is essentially a very mono-focused culture. And that colors, those are the glasses that we each wear. And the glasses of our modern day culture there's a lot of wonderful things about it, but there's also some assumptions. There's a lot of cultural assumptions that come with the way that we have all grown up in this society together. And some of those, well, a lot of those do not necessarily encourage people to view every day as magic and to view the world as fully alive, and in some senses to have like a more animist or more pantheist, the idea that like divinity is present in every moment and that magic works. And from the perspective of someone who is very witchy, whatever word you want to call it, spiritual, that perspective can be found sometimes in expressing itself in other ways in other cultures. So when we look back in history, we can see how other people have interacted with the ideas of magic, how other people have interacted with the idea that maybe rivers and trees are alive. And those cultures still exist. Of course, they're not all, we haven't killed, even with colonialism, we haven't successfully killed them all, thank the gods. But you can find that in history, you can find that in other cultures. And by studying that, you widen and broaden your imagination and your vision of what is possible. And that is, I think, the thing that it gives us the most is that it allows you to see a lot more is possible than what our sort of tunnel vision, which naturally happens, but the tunnel vision of our culture encourages us to see this is the way things are, this is the only way that it's possible. And most likely magic is not a part of that. But if you want to have that magical spiritual worldview, widening it out and looking at other cultures and at history will help your imagination and your ability to envision that grow.
So you can think of history as informing your rituals. Because if you just say, oh, I'm just going to take what happens from today, like you're a butterfly and you've only lived for 2 weeks, that's it. Then there aren't any roots. And with North Wyldewood in particular, being rooted in history, in the rich cultures that we work with, you need to know what their beliefs were, as much as we can know, because there are some cultures that didn't write down anything. Thank you, Greeks and Egyptians, for writing some stuff down, Greeks and Romans. Yay. Norse, Celts, little less so. But that helps you to understand where you came from in terms of ancestors of humans, not, a particular group of people, but we all have these ancestors, where we came from. And then you think about where you are now and where would you like to be? Where would you like your rituals to take you? Because your rituals are doing something for you. They're helping you to ground into today, but also to be fertilized from the past. So it's important to know where you came from so you know where you're going. Absolutely. And rituals are important, and so is the history. It doesn't mean that you have two things. You can only have one thing that's important. Both things can be important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, can I say this one?
Oh, yeah, do it.
How do I know I'm a witch? Where does my witch power come from? And how do I access it? So let's take the first thing. How do I know I'm a witch? Joanna, you go first.
Sure. You know you're a witch because because you do magic.
Yeah.
I think that there is something, and what that is it is actually a more complicated statement to say you do magic, because what it means to do magic might look and be very different for different people. And that's where, to take this in a dark direction, why some people have been killed for it. Because when someone else thinks you've been doing magic, you may absolutely not have thought about what you were doing. Like, for example, if we look back in history, or even unfortunately, in the modern day, there are places on Earth where divination and witchcraft are absolutely illegal, and people are still put to death for it. And that is
Yes.
a tragic, horrible thing that we should all be very aware of, and hopefully that will not be the case in the future. But the idea that something that you do is to someone else looks like a magical act means that the very nature of what it means to do magic is very malleable. And it really can be something as simple as like, oh, well, I say a prayer over my coffee, and, I make an offering in the morning of a little bit of that coffee to the land. To one person, that might be not doing magic. To another person, they'd be like, a witch. Or, oh yeah, I like to read the coffee grounds. And that's really cool. Every time I have a cup of like strong coffee, I'll read the coffee grounds. Okay. To one person that might be doing magic. To another person, it's just a thing that someone in your family's always done, so you always do it. But it is the act of doing a thing that interacts with the larger I would specify non-human community of life, which could mean it could involve, like, as I gave the example of, making an offering in the morning and being thankful to the land for, and the spirits for another day of life. It could also be the idea that you are doing magic in order to get a thing, to encourage, something to come to you through the act of a spell, or simply doing some divination and pulling some tarot cards. All of those things are magical acts because they are involving you interacting with occulted, which just means something secret or hidden or a little bit out of the ordinary, in order to, either know more about your fate or change your fate a little bit. You're a witch if you do any of those things, and no one can tell you any other, because that it is what you make it, as long as you're doing magic.
Carl Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." So if you say you're a witch, then go and do something that is witchy. So what would be witchy? Joanna just gave you a bunch of examples with coffee grounds, pouring out some coffee. We've already talked about doing, daily meditations. And it doesn't have to be some like big, long thing that you're like in meditation for an hour, or you're sitting still and like, oh, no, that's not what you have to do. It could be that if you have the time for that, but most of us don't, and our world is very quick right now. So in essence, it's just taking that time to connect with nature, to listen to your own inner voice, aka your intuition. Also, that's part of your witch power. And if you do divination, then, spending some time with choose one card, and then, don't do a whole like Celtic cross and like, oh, I'm overwhelmed by this. Yeah, nope. One card, and really get to know it and sit with it, and maybe spend like 2 minutes just looking at it and saying, how does this apply to me? What's the meaning? But also, what do the images say to me? Because that's part of reaching into your witch power. And your witch power is inside of you. And that is how you access it, by slowing down and listening. Shut the mouth from talking and shut the brain down a little bit. And that's why you do some deep breathing, and then you listen. And that's not always easy. Sometimes that is the challenge right there.
Yes, that is oftentimes the hardest part. That accessing of power is also, I think, that's where I go back to the sort of failure of imagination, is that there are a lot of, I really like fantasy genres. I do read a fair number of fantasy books, Lord of the Rings, I'm a Star Wars fan, Harry Potter, you name it. I like that kind of stuff. I like it. However, there are some ways that I feel like it's done a disservice to how people think that magic is supposed to have bells and whistles and look very spectacular, and that makes it hard for people to understand that they are already in these small ways accessing their own witch power. It makes us say like, "Oh, well, this thing happened and I said this thing and then an eagle went right past me. So anyway, how do I become a witch?" I'm like, but the eagle came to you. And that's the thing, is that we are so used to expecting something grandiose that we don't see the small, quiet ways that flowering of our magical selves, our creative, intuitive selves is already happening when we make a decision to say, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit every day. And honestly, that's the biggest challenge. So I'm a violinist, and I always tell my students that the hardest part of every practice session is just opening the case. And that if you can actually open the case and actually put your instrument up to your body and play a few notes, you have actually crossed the hardest barrier. And that's it. So it's just making a decision to say, I'll do a little bit, and know that that's how you actually access your power. That's the most important step, not whether or not you can do 3 hours of meditation or grandiose rituals. Can you do that little bit and make it consistent? Because that's how your witch power will start to grow.
Okay.
The next question is, there are so many books on becoming a witch. New beginners guides come out every year, often with conflicting information. How do I vet these sources as I start out? Woof, good one. Oh, I was extremely blessed to encounter so I started in witchcraft when I was about 11 or 12. And at first, my parents said, oh no. And then once they did say, okay, I guess you can read these books, their rule was no meeting anyone who calls themselves a witch until you're 18. And they did that to protect me and make sure I wasn't going to fall into some sort of, cult or, get hurt as a young girl. I appreciate that. And I think that that was a very respectful, reasonable thing. And then when I did turn 18, all the people that I met, including the person I am talking to right now, Miss Denise, and all the other wonderful people in the New York community I met, were all really lovely. And so I had only pretty much great experiences. I was very fortunate, and I thank my guides for that every day. There are people who, unfortunately, maybe are predatory or just don't have good sourcing of their information, and those things can be harmful. A red flag that I look for is anyone who A, says that they know everything about a subject. That to me, immediately, my red flag goes up. Anyone who claims expertise, because most of the people I know who are really great at anything will be humble and will say that they're still working on learning things. So anyone who says no, they've got it, they're all set, that's a red flag. And the other one is if they try to limit you to only working with them. Anyone who's going to limit you and try to sort of like collapse your walls so that it's like, oh no, only study with me, or you should only pay attention to these sources. Anyone who's going to like try to close walls around someone, I think of that as a red flag. Outside of that, if it comes to like written or, video information, I will just take pieces of information at random, like it's on a source of something I don't know anything about. Astrology is not my strong suit. So if somebody's saying something that's astrological, I might take a few pieces of information that this so-called expert has given and then independently research it and see, does that check out? Do I find that in other sources? And do other people who are recognized experts in that field say similar things? Doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to agree with each other, but some big pieces, look for if you can find sources for their material. If you do some research and you do some digging, do reputable sources also agree on that? If not, then you need to start checking more things before you accept it.
As a fifth grade teacher, my students had to write reports, and they had to show three pieces of evidence. That was a 5-paragraph essay. I'm sure many of you have already done this in school. So when it comes to that, you need to be able to use your critical thinking skills and say, let me, like Joanna was saying, I can Google this fact and see if it's true. The other thing is going back to the previous questions of know your history. If you know that here are the Irish Celtic gods, okay, here they are. And then another source says that Samhain was Samhain was in honor of the Celtic god of death named Samana. You can say that is trash because that is completely incorrect. If you check your historical sources, it's not there. Second of all, you can Google it and again, not there. So, checking your sources is really, really important. And then when you find your historical sources, start there and then look at their bibliographies. And then you can look at other books that they have, and then you can use those books. So as a beginner, that's kind of tough because you don't really know. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just make a video or we'll post a PDF of some sources for you to look at as your anchor sources, and then you can check or verify the new books out there with the anchor sources. But please, you need to look at everyone and talk to people and see where people got their information from. And again, if it's something that's historical, you should be able to check that out. If someone makes a claim and says, no, this came to me from my, 10th grandmother, okay, that's great, but it's a historical source, and that's not, it doesn't bear out in the actual history with historians, anthropologists, sociologists, all the things, all those folks. So
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah, we will put something together because that is a really great question. And I think that just having some basic sources of online and books that Denise and I check frequently when we are teaching or doing stuff, like obviously we still have to check our sources, and history and the knowledge that we have of these cultures and these practices do evolve over time. So sometimes the older sources, it could have been I could give lots of examples of things that were considered respected sources in the past that, things have moved on and the amount of information has come through and different assumptions are, now made about that information. So it's important to keep up to date and to really make sure that the people you are learning from also try to keep up to date. We all need to keep working on this stuff. Hence you're never done because you're always learning. And this is a constant process of taking in information and using critical thinking, like Denise said, to be checking and maneuvering through this.
And the reason that these things change is that there are anthropologists who do discoveries and then try to take the colonial mindedness out of it, or the women can't possibly be doing anything with a drum. It's just a cake. That's a new friend of ours.
Shall I tell that? So this came from our friend Elise Wells, who was talking about how in the olden days, at least 3 decades ago, in some museums, they used to have statues of the statues from ancient Greece of women. That had what was a circular object. I don't have anything circular in front of me, so I can't demonstrate. They would label it, archaic woman with cake. when you look at them, and a female historian who did look at them was like, well, that's obviously a drum. But they had been labeled woman with cake because, well, obviously women in the ancient times weren't using drums. That's a male thing. So there are some like elements of misogyny, elements of cultural assumptions that do change over time, and they will continue to change and evolve over time too, because we're never going to be, perfectly able to look at these cultures that are not ourselves. It's hard to look at ourselves and be objective, obviously, let alone looking at something from a totally different area of the world or 2,000 years ago. Yeah. Anyway, so woman with cake is now our sort of whenever we're making an assumption about something that may not be true, it's like, oh, is that a woman with cake? I
Mm.
don't know. Can I initiate myself? Is it safe? Oof. Lots of different answers possible to that.
So when I first started out as a baby witch and I was really into it, this was like 1996, I did an initiation that I found in, I think it was like one of Scott Cunningham's books. And it took me like 2 hours to do, and I had so many things to say. But yeah, you can self-initiate. Of course, you can say you're declaring basically what you're doing when you're self-initiating is saying to the gods and spirits and nature and ancestors, well, all the folk, all the spirit folks, the other than human folk, I am declaring that I am open to making a relationship with you, and that I'm going to walk this path and I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And that's, so is it safe? Sure, because
Mm.
you are not, as long as you're not offering up your firstborn or blood or anything else, you'd be surprised.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I would say that it is both safe and unsafe. I also self-initiated. I think a lot of, there's so many books and so many ways to do that. I know people have done it multiple times, and through different forms, and that's really great. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. Each initiation is different also. And group initiations like those that we do within our inner coven are very, different, and different closed traditions also have their own initiation ceremonies, which are very different from self-initiations, but they're all beautiful. And if done with serious intent, they are very powerful. And therefore, nothing that is that powerful is ever truly safe, because even walking out your door is not actually truly safe. So you are declaring yourself to be taking these practices seriously, and that brings enormous, beautiful things to your life. And it means that the spirits will be like, oh, look at that one over there. Huh, well, that's new, and they'll take a little bit more of an interest in you. And that is really, really good. And it also means that you might get some new challenges in your life. They might present you with some more lessons. So that is that element of you're making a declaration of something, and it is going to change you, and it's going to change some things about your life. Not in any way that I could predict or tell you. No one could, because it's different for everyone. But yeah, it's a good thing to do. And just know that if you choose to do it, if you take one out of a book, or if you ask us, for what we've done, we'd be happy to talk to you about it. It will have some interesting effects on your life, though. So be aware of that fact.
Yes. And usually not in a bad way,
Oh
just
no. I didn't.
as Joanna mentioned, new lessons or challenges, which we all go, what, more growth? Aren't I done? No, you're never done, not ever. And when you are done, I believe that is your time to shuffle off this mortal coil.
Yeah, exactly. Then you've sort of finished with this lifetime. So indeed. All right. So how do I know that all of this is not just coming from inside my head?
I got this.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I was actually thinking about this morning.
Great.
5 a.m. This is what I think about. And it's not that you do, it's not that I don't know the difference, but you do need to take a pause when you're first starting and saying, oh, where is this coming from? It doesn't matter where it's coming from. If it's coming from within you, if it's coming from outside of you, you are made of stardust. Everything is magical. So you may have, images and thoughts and feelings that are just beautiful, and go with them. But the other thing to remember is that, with a guided meditation, you are guided along your journey in the meditation. When you do something that is a little looser and it's more trancy or journey-like, then what happens is that you get a lot of what I call mental poo. It is basically your mind takes in tons of information, tons of visual and other sensual information. And you need to first get through that clutter and just sort of let it poo itself out. And then the only way to do that is by just breathing and sinking in deeper to yourself, which means just like you're not trying to catch those images or catch those thoughts. See them more as like clouds that just come and go, and that's it. And you just hang out there, and then you will feel what you feel. And it is when you reach that point, that's when you get to look at things. And then sometimes those things are, you realize that didn't really come from me, because you'll feel it. Again, this is more listening to your intuition. And the only way to listen to your intuition is if you shut things up. Your mouth, your monkey mind, just, bring it down and breathe. Slow down. I've had a lot of coffee, so it's a little harder for me right now. Don't have coffee when you try to do this at home, kids. So yes, that is one way. And I'm sure Joanna has another. And then I have a third after Joanna goes.
Go with yours, because I'm in the middle of trying to find a quote that I want to use for this. So what's your third?
Okay, so my third is, when you work in community with people, which is why we have this Wyldewood Circle, when you work in community, then you can verify your information with someone else. And you can ask and say, hey, I had this experience, and you share what happened in your guided meditation. And then you think, oh, I'm sure everyone thinks this. Well, we all think that way. Growing up as kids, however you grew up, you may have thought, oh, this is perfectly normal. Then you go to someone else's house and you're like, oh, they do this differently. That's interesting. When you share what's in your guided meditation or in your spiritual experiences, you will find that there are some similarities, and that there are also some differences, because each person is unique and each person's experience is unique, but you get to verify that. Now, if you do something as a group and have a spiritual experience, then you also get to say something like, hey, did you just see that? And, did you see that rock turn into a person? And then someone else says, yes, I did. And they look like this. And then you add something else in, and then you're all like, oh, we did have that. And then you get chills, an actual experience.
There's a Rumi poem that I always think of. And again, this is the Coleman Barks translation, which some people say, he takes a lot of liberties with Rumi's poetry. So it's kind of almost a poem by Coleman Barks more than Rumi, maybe, depending on your view of his translations. But essentially, the poem says that somebody comes and asks about whether or not his visions of God are true. And in answer, Rumi asks a number of questions. And he asks the person, how many children do you have? How many wives? Do you feed how many goats, I think? Do you feed the birds in winter? And the person answers all these questions. And the poem concludes by him saying, your vision, your idea is true if it makes you better, essentially, if it makes you kinder to every person that you meet. And I've always loved that, because I think that that's a really good metric that I will use. A lot of you know I have a podcast about divination. My first book on divination is coming out next year. Divination and forms of knowledge are really a big deal to me, and I think about this often. And I will look at whether the visions or the divination that I'm getting, as Denise said, does it check out with actual things that I can check? You have to treat yourself like a scientist, actually use the scientific method. There's nothing wrong with the scientific method incorporated into magic and divination, in my opinion, and we should do it more. So you can really check things, you can track your results, et cetera, et cetera. And then also, does it make your life better? Does following the things that you are being told lead to you being happier, you being more successful, the people in your life also succeeding and being happier? Does it make you kinder and better? And that is actually at the heart of a lot of the process for me, in addition to fact checking and scientific method and checking with your community buddy systems. then does it just make you better? Does it make your life better? Because truth, like really deep truth, absolutely will. And the stuff that is the mental chatter, that's anxiety or that's wishful thinking or any of the other ways that we can pervert these things, or that, our brains can misunderstand and misinterpret the things that are happening around us, which they frequently do, those will push you in directions that don't necessarily make you happier or your life better. Doesn't always mean that things that are true are always happy, but that in that long trajectory sense, it is leading you in a good way. And that's where, it's important to have community, because community and your good close friends, or the people that you can trust that are also on these spiritual journeys, will be able to help you be guided, and you help them guide yourselves in that direction of following truth, to be kinder to everyone you meet, to have a better life, to use these things to actually have a good life. Because that's really what it comes down to. Magic should make your life taste better. It should make all these things better. And that's why we do it. Otherwise it's like, yeah, it's fun, I guess. But does it make your life better? And those things will eventually be a thread to guide you. And it's not in your head. Don't worry about it. What if I call the wrong god or goddess for the spell? Will it still work? Mm.
Oh,
Denise, I know you have a story for this one. It's a little dark though, so try to keep it a little, I don't know. Not
it's not the worst.
okay. We'll go for it. I have story too, but we'll go with Denise's first.
And then you can uplift people afterwards.
I'll try. I'll try.
So when it was, I guess I started investigating, like just reading one book after another, after I went to a witch shop in, I think it was probably September of 1995. And then my boyfriend at the time gave me a bunch of books at Christmas of 1995. And then February of 1996, we broke up. And I was like, well, I have just learned all this witch stuff, so I'm going to do a spell. I did multiple spells, but one in particular that has to do with wrong god or goddess. Sometimes wrong is best. But so I wanted to do a love spell to remove all the negatives in our relationship, things that were pulling us apart. So I called on Hecate, not the number one choice for a love spell. I understood, I knew exactly who Aphrodite was, which should have been the goddess that I went to. That was not the one I went to. I wanted to go to one that was powerful because I really wanted it to work. And she was the goddess of witches. That's what I heard. So, I didn't really do a whole lot of research. Let me just mention that. I just heard goddess of witches. So I was like, I'm a witch, so I'm going to do this. And so I did. And, and that was it. There was nothing left, because sometimes when you remove all the things that are holding you back, there's really nothing there anyway. So was it the wrong god, or was it the wrong goddess? I don't think so. Looking back, hindsight, 30 plus years, no. But at the time, yes, I absolutely felt I had done something wrong. And your spell will work. It just won't work in the way that you think it will.
Yeah,
Make it light.
I'll try. I don't actually have like a very specific story of calling on the wrong deity for a working. What I would say is, in similar fashion, there have been some times when I've done a working for something, and the deity that I called on for help, it was not maybe perfectly aligned with how I wanted it. And I think that's exactly what Denise is saying, where it's not necessarily a whether or not it works, it's a how it'll work. So if you go to a deity who is more associated with, yeah, so I'm trying to make it light, and then I'm like, no, it's not gonna go light. Uh, let's say with things, with protection that is rather severe, and with, boundary crossing not being allowed at all, we could continue with Hecate with that. and you were asking for maybe something to go well in your life, the way that it might go well might be that some other things that need pruning in your life will go away. They may go away faster than you would like, and maybe not necessarily even in the way that you would like, but you will in the end get the thing that you wanted. And that's, I think, where going back to the history portion, it's really important to understand all the facets of the deities or spirits, because it's not just deities. Like we can be talking about, archangels, we can be talking about saints, and really understanding, who these spirits are and what their specialities are, because each one of us, even between Denise and myself, we have specialties, and we have things that if somebody comes to me to ask for my help with something, I'm going to most likely call on my specialties. I'm pretty good at planning. I'm pretty good at, doing research. So I will find ways to incorporate my specialties of research and scheduling and, bylaw creation and stuff like that. And also music. And I'll try to apply those specialties in order to get the thing for my friend and make that happen. If those specialties are not really helpful to your goal, it may not work, or it may work in a way that takes longer, or will, have some other knock-on effects you wouldn't have agreed to. So think about the general vibe and feel of what it is that you want, and make sure that the deities or the spirit's specialties really align with that. And that's really the most important thing. Again, it really comes down to knowing really specifically what it is you really want. Be careful what you wish for. You just might get it, is an incredibly true statement on so many levels. And that certainly goes into spell creation and performance as well.
Yes.
And we are perfectly on time. I love these questions. Any one of them could be an entire, hours of discussion. And I think what I will say is that for a few of these, I'm also going to throw them in the chat, because these were privately sent to us by email and text message and stuff like that. So I will throw a couple of these into the community over the next couple of days for other people to give their thoughts on after I've posted this. So people who can, you can watch what we have said and then start a discussion about any one of these points that you are curious about, because we'd love to hear your thoughts and do more deep dives. And of course, if these answers and questions have spurred you on to have, follow-up questions, you can throw them into an email to us. You can also, I will put up a Q&A forum post in the next few days so that we're prepped for the next one. And we'll just have some more great discussions. So thank you to everyone who submitted, and thank you to everyone who's watching this in the replay afterwards.
And we'll see you in the Wyldewood.
See you in the Wyldewood.